Well, we covered a lot of material last week. We learned about chord voicing, we learned about basic harmonic progressions, and we learned about voice leading of those progressions. Now, of course, all the progressions we used were in root position, and truth be told, in most music, not just classical music, we don't always find chords just in root position. And to be even a little bit more honest, it's because it's a little bit boring. More than just boring, it's actually very limiting. We can only express so much if we're just using root position chords. So it's quite common to find chords used in inversion. That means finding chords where it's not the root that's in the bass, it's the third that's in the bass, or the fifth that's in the bass. Or if it's a seventh chord, even the seventh in the bass. Now, once we introduce that, there are a lot of possibilities. But the truth is, we don't see all these possibilities. We only see some of them. Well, I guess you could say you see many of them, but you see some of them a lot. And what I thought is I would introduce the ones you see a lot to add to your compendium of harmonic progressions that you can draw from for your own creative work. So let's get started by looking at the simplest of progressions, the 1-5-1 progression, and the kinds of inversions that we see with that. From there, we'll go on to look at 1-4-5 chord progressions and even 1-4-1 chord progressions, and the kinds of inversions that we can use with all of those as well. So here we have our 1-5-1 chord progression. We're in the key of D minor. You know, last week was a major week. We did everything in major. So this week, let's make it a minor week. And I hope we'll be able to do everything in minor. I think it's possible. Okay, so I look at this thing and, well, I want to introduce inversions this week. So what inversion can we do with this? Well, let's try to do this again. I'll just copy it over here. But I want to make this chord with the third in the bass. And to notate that, we do this 5 and 5-6. The 6, it says that the third is in the bass. So let me see what I need to do with voice leading, because that's definitely one thing you need to keep in mind. The voice leading, actually, when we move to working with inversions, we don't have all these nice little algorithms that we had in the first week, where we're working with root position chords, and so if the bass goes up by a step, that means the other voices can move down in contrary motion to the nearest chord tone. When you do that, then you very easily avoid bad voice leading. But when we work with inversion, we just have to be very cautious that we're moving by the smallest amount, moving by step or the smallest interval possible, and that we don't have things like parallel octaves and parallel fifths. So let's see what happens. For instance, if I just take the bass and do that, well, we get third and root and fifth. So is that okay? Well, of course, we have to look even closer, because look, we have this parallel octave here. And this parallel octave we can't have. We also have 2/3, and someone might say, oh, is that okay? Well, it can be, but I want to show the preferred way of doing it. This is the preferred way, that we'll have, say, 2/5, and then we'd have a root and the third in the bass. 2/5 or 2 roots is more common than 2/3 in the voicing of a chord like this. You will find cases where you have 2/3, but I do have to say you will not find it with the 5 chord, and I'll explain that in a little bit. If we look at this, we see that we're following the general rules that were laid out last week for voice leading. Keep a common tone, move everybody else by step, include some contrary motion, and we're also avoiding parallel fifths and parallel octaves. So good, this should be fine. So there's a good example of changing a 1-5-1 progression in root position for 1-5-1 progression where the 5 is in first inversion. Very common to see. Now I want to look at another voicing of this 1-5-1 chord progression. Here we have a closed structure. but it's like before, but it's a different voicing. And so let's voice lead this. Well, here's our common tone, right? So let's keep that guy. And now here's our bass, and that needs to go to the leading tone. So that's fine. So what do we want to do? Well, maybe we get some contrary motion in here. So let's move this guy up to the E. And this guy, let's move up to the A. Let's double check we don't have any problems there. Voice leading wise, we don't have any problems here. Let's look at the doubling. Well, we've got 2 roots, 1/3, and 1/5. Yeah, this is actually fine. This would be a common kind of voicing of a first inversion triad. Now let me just voice lead it back. We don't have to voice lead back the same way. We can, whoops. Oh no, it's going to do this every time. Sorry about that. And this is one way to do it. Rather than going back to where we were, we can actually have this A go down to the F rather than have this A go back to the F. Yeah. This one we keep as a common tone, and we move this instead just to get a different voicing. Let's hear this. I'll just write in quickly the Roman numeral analysis. And we move on to the next example. So those are first inversion triads. And so you might say, well, okay, good, but can we use first inversion 7th chords? Sure, no problem. So let's do that here. Just get a voicing for this first chord, like that. And we know we need to get that in the bass. And we know we have this common tone. And let's move this guy up by step. And so then, well, okay, we've got root, 3rd, 5th. This guy should give us the 7th. Easy enough. It just moves by step, like that. We have our tendency tones here. They're a diminished 5th. So we just move them back in towards each other here. And you get that. Analyze this as 1, 5, 6, 5, 1. Let me play that. By and large, if I do any example with a 5 chord as a triad, you can also do it with a 5 chord as a 7th chord. There are basically no situations, I can't think of any at least, where you need to restrict yourself to a triad rather than a 7th chord. You do, of course, have to be cautious of the extra voice leading issues that arise with a 7th chord, but as long as you're aware of those, if you want to use a 7th chord because it has a nicer sound in a particular moment, then that's fine. So I give the example of a 5-7 chord here in first inversion. I'll do that in a little bit later on, also in this video. But I may not do it in the future. And I just want to tell you that if I don't do it, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that I'm trying to save time. And you should understand that if you see an example with a 5 triad, that you could also do it with a 5/7 chord, that is a dominant 7th chord. Well, we saw that the 5 chord can be used in first inversion, so can the 5 chord be used in second inversion, that is with the 5th in the bass? Yes, it's very common, and I want to show you the most common situation where it's used. Usually we place I'll do that later. Usually what we do is we place the 5-6-4 between 2 1 chords. So we have this 1-5-1 chord progression, as we see up here. And we can do the same. Well, let me put that in the bass, because that's going to be the bass note, right? That's the fifth of the chord. And we've got our common tone here. So let's throw that guy in there. And this is pretty close to the third, so we might as well get the third in for that guy. And then what do we do with this? Well, okay, one thing I need to tell you about 6/4 chords, that is triads in second inversion. You have to double the fifth. So I'll write that in here. And let me put in the Roman numeral analysis. 1, I'm writing it at 5, 6, 4. And the thing that usually happens here is 1 goes to 5, oops, that's minor, that shouldn't be the case, 5, 6, 4. And then it continues on to 1, 6. This is why we have this 5, 6, 4. It acts as what we call a passing chord. It passes, it allows the bass to pass very smoothly from the first scale degree to the third scale degree in this situation. And then we just voice lead it. Well, it makes kind of sense to have this go here, because if it went up to the F, we get parallel octaves, yeah? So let's try it there. Let's keep our common tone. And then we've got root, third, fifth. Well, we either need another fifth or another root, preferably. This guy is real close to the root, so let's put that in there. And then we add in the Roman numeral analysis, 1, 6. It can also go in the opposite direction, so that you know. You can go this way, up, but if you're at 1, 6 and you want to go back down, 5, 6, 4 to 1, that's completely fine as well. Maybe you ask again, can we do this with seventh chords? And yes, you can. So let me just do an example of that. And in this case, if we move that guy, then we get root, third, fifth, and seventh. So that's good. We have to rename this, because it's not a 6/4 chord, it's a 4/3 chord now. And this one will make sense to double the third, because again, these are our tendency tones. This is the leading tone, voice leads up to the tonic. This is the fourth scale degree, voice leads down, that's the seventh of the chord. Voice leads down to the third scale degree. You say, oh, wait, first inversion chord, it's with double thirds, that's not good. No, it's fine. It's fine. This is a perfect example of when doubling the third makes a lot of sense, because it voice leads very nicely into a doubled third. So really, with voice leading of inversions, well, first inversion triads, or first inversion seventh chords, it's a good rule of thumb to say, well, try to double the root or the fifth, and if you can't, double the third. But if you get to a situation like this, where it makes the most sense in terms of voice leading to double the third, don't feel bad about doubling the third as though you failed or something. You haven't. This is much better than trying to double the fifth or the root.